Joining us now is Marcin Zaborowski, Policy Director and Future of Security Program at Globsec. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, good to be here.
So, would you say that the current period is actually a renaissance of sorts for NATO? A couple of years ago, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, had made a very unfortunate comment suggesting that NATO is brain dead. Ironically enough, he is right now one of the politicians who are at the forefront of defending Ukraine, and NATO has gained a renewed purpose. Do you think that it will be able to maintain this momentum?
Well, yes and no. Let's remind ourselves that this is the 75th anniversary of NATO's existence. So this is a very special summit for NATO, and it's very fitting that it's happening in Washington because this is the 75th anniversary of the Washington Treaty. So Washington Treaty, which was signed by the founding 12 member states. And let's also remind ourselves that thanks to NATO, the Cold War was won by the West without firing a single shot between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed, and also very importantly, NATO survived the end of the Cold War, because with the end of the Cold War, the Warsaw Pact, which was bringing together the Soviet satellite states, Poland included, dissolved. And then a lot of people were saying, so maybe NATO should do the same thing. And that would be a right disaster, of course, because then there would be nobody to resolve the situation in the Balkans. There would be no alliance to act in Afghanistan. There would be no alliance to offer help to Ukraine. So the NATO purpose, I think, has been proven for the last 75 years, and the alliance is very much alive and kicking. But at the same time, we are on the eve of election in the United States. And in November this year, it is possible that the United States will elect Donald Trump, who has been NATO skeptic, who has been raising concerns about the application of Article 5, the application of common security and common defense, and who's been also saying that the states which don't spend sufficiently on security and defense should receive no help from the United States or the alliance in case of an attack from Russia. So this is not something which we want to hear on this 75th anniversary. And as always, there is a bit of a bad news, good news, meaning that 75 years of good fortune, but also always a risk around the corner, and that risk is called Donald Trump.
So one could say that it could have been worse, as insofar as long-standing organizations go. NATO was founded in 1949. Now, a couple of years earlier, we had the founding of the United Nations, and this organization, according to many, is much less relevant. I mean, looking at the events from today, a UN Security Council member bombing hospitals in Ukraine and killing cancer patients. Well, there is that. But actually, you've made a very interesting point about Donald Trump, because NATO might have survived many important events throughout history. Do you think it will survive Donald Trump? There are some who say, well, he really does pose a risk because he doesn't really understand the essence of NATO. He tries to treat it as he would have treated, say, some sort of corporate venture, a business, in other words. Is this the right approach to this organization, though?
Well, it is clearly not the right approach to the multilateral organization based on common values rather than on common business interests. And you have a problem right here. But, we had other presidents in the past who did not always completely comprehend NATO and so on. But I mean, nowhere ever we had a challenge like now with the president, potential presidential candidate, actually already confirmed presidential candidate, saying that he will not necessarily stand by the principle of collective defense. So that's very worrisome, and let's be honest about it. It's a challenge. Having said that, it's also true that Donald Trump will serve 4 years if he's elected. And during the 4 years, it's very unlikely he will be able to withdraw from United States from the alliance.
Would you
And
even go
he's
as far?
banned by.
Some people are saying
Well,
it's
he
all
did.
tactics. It's all tactics designed to make member states pay more because they don't. And I mean, that's a major point. But problem is, he's actually making it seem like this could be the presidency that will, if not demolish NATO outright, then at least weaken it substantially.
The weakening of NATO is possible if Donald Trump indeed even goes around and say that he has the intention of withdrawing United States from NATO. Even if he doesn't do it, that already undermines the credibility of the alliance, who is just based on trust. And that way the trust would be damaged, and the deterrence effect of NATO, whereby there is a clear understanding that if one of the vulnerable member states is being attacked, then all the others are coming to its rescue. That kind of a principle would be undermined. So Donald Trump did signal during his first term at the helm of the U.S. administration. He did signal the intention that he wanted to pull out of NATO. He was stopped by the so-called adults in the room, meaning his chief of staff, also the chief of combined services, General Mike Miley, by Secretary of Defense, and so on. He was surrounded by mature politicians and people with some experience of allied politics. And it is unfortunately an expectation that the new Trump presidency would be more radical, and he would not be listening to any adults or semi-adults, and he would be basically doing as he wishes. However, he is banned by the resolution, by the law of the U.S. Congress, which prevents president from withdrawing from the alliance without the approval of the Congress.
So clearly, Donald Trump is looking at NATO and thinks it's something like Netflix. Essentially, if you don't have the premium plan, you're not going to get what you want, like Article 5. Well, you need to expand your subscription to actually include this sort of luxury, which is, of course, very problematic. But it also sheds light on another issue, namely, regardless of what Trump does or does not, and whether he's actually elected president, there is a question of spending. There is a question of some countries in Europe which have powerful economies not really meeting their obligations. The ways to achieve this aside, I mean, this discussion that Trump is holding clearly is not very diplomatic. He's doing it all in the open, all out in the open. But do you think European countries have what it takes to fill the gap, the potential gap, or basically just, to treat this obligation as it should be treated seriously? Now, Central and Eastern European countries, they do that, but what about the others?
It's a complex question, I would say. I mean, it's we can always apply the simplistic measure saying that the states need to spend 2% of GDP on NATO, not on NATO but on defense, and that in itself is sufficient. Now we know that measure is insufficient. It's insufficient because you can spend 2% of GDP on various things. You can spend it on infrastructure, you can spend it on pensions, you can spend it on some kind of a social army related or armed forces related projects, not necessarily on the modernization of armed forces, which is what is needed in this case. So, however, you are right that it's really the threat of United States not coming to the not really taking seriously its obligation under Article 5, meaning the Article 5, meaning that collective defense, which is what Donald Trump has threatened. So the threat that might happen has certainly motivated a lot of states to meet this obligation of 2% of GDP on defense. Like 5-6 years ago, there was only a handful of those states, like France, Poland was one of them, Estonia was one of them, Great Britain, and that will be it. That will be it. There will be 3, 4, 5 states. Yeah. Nowadays, out of the 33 members of the alliance, 2/3 are already meeting that requirement, and by meeting this requirement, not necessarily because they have matured in their thinking about security of defense, but out of fear and a possibility that Trump may indeed do what he says he would do, meaning not defend those states which are not really seriously investing into their defense. So we are at the beginning of a certain journey there. And the Trump effect had also some positive and galvanizing effect on laggards and on those who have been underspending, really.
What do you think is going to happen in Germany? Germany had earlier on announced the Zeitenwende. They wanted to expand their capabilities. So far, it is going at a fairly slow pace. On the other hand, we have an ambitious defense minister, Mr. Boris Pistorius, who might actually try to tackle this challenge. Do you think he will succeed? And also, why is Germany, with a powerful defense industry that manufactures weapons for export, so reluctant to embrace its role as one of the linchpins of the alliance on the European continent?
Several reasons for that. But responding to your first question, whether Germany would, live up to Zeitenwende and would be spending more on defense, we can already respond to that affirmatively. Germany has been ramping up defense spending faster than many other states, and according to some measures, it has already been spending above 2% of GDP. And 2% of GDP of Germany, the 80 million nation, the wealthiest nation in Europe, is a lot of money. So, and they got there from being one of the biggest laggards, spending 1.1, 1.2 on defense, then suddenly now jumping up to, after 2 years of war in Ukraine, jumping to 2% of GDP, or not to according to all measures, but according to some measures. So but they definitely been doing more there. Now, why they have been so reluctant? There's a mixture of history, there is a mixture of psychology in it, and there is also an opportunism in it. History and psychology, we all know. After the Second World War, Germans have been reluctant to seriously invest in defense and to engage in active combat because of the what happened in the Second World War. And there has been a very powerful peace movement in the country. And it has taken them ages, really, the decades of the post-Cold War period to actually convince the public opinion that, for example, sending troops to Kosovo is there to save lives, is not to cause harm. So you have that there, and this is obviously changing. But then you have another element there. Why would you be spending a great deal of money on security and defense, which is deeply unpopular in the country, if the United States is doing it for you? Yeah? If the United States is this, almost a security agency which comes at cheap, really. Yeah? So it became, I would say, not fully conscious way of thinking about it, but it is the fact that this is what's been happening, and this is what got Donald Trump so annoyed, and this is also what is annoying a lot of Americans these days on both sides of the aisle.
So overall, changing this situation will require also a shift in mentality. But as you're saying, this is the moment where actually we're seeing the first signs that these changes are happening. Marcin Zaborowski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.